Collins English for Exams. Vocabulary for IELTS. Copyright HarperCollins Publishers 2012. Track 1. Speaker 1.
I've learned a lot from so many people, but I suppose the person that stands out is my colleague Lynn. When I started working at the firm, my employer didn't give me a lot of formal training, so I had to learn on the job. I was given the desk next to Lynn, and she explained everything to me. She was incredibly efficient. She knew the job so well, and she made it look so easy.
Speaker 2.
The person I admire the most is probably my boss. She really knows what she wants to achieve with the organisation, but at the same time she is so flexible and open to new ideas. She really takes an interest not only in her clients, but also in her employees. She really listens to what they have to say.
Speaker 3. I suppose the relationship I've found most difficult, but ultimately most rewarding, has been my relationship with my younger brother. He's different from me in almost every way you can imagine. I'm the kind of person who likes to get things done, but he is a real dreamer, so idealistic. It used to drive me crazy, but over the years, I've come to really admire him for following his dreams. Track 2.
I'm going to begin this section of my talk by saying something about only children, that is, children without siblings. Historically, only children were relatively uncommon. However, these days, as families are becoming smaller, being an only child has become relatively more common. There are many reasons for this trend, social, economic and political, which I won't go into at this point. However, I will say that having an only child generally means that parental resources can be concentrated on the one child. And I would add that by parental resources, I mean not just money, but also care and attention. Only children have frequently been seen as different from children with siblings and subjected to negative stereotype. They are often considered to be less tolerant of others, i.e., less able to accept differences, to allow those with different points of view to say and do as they like. Not surprisingly, they are sometimes said to be less cooperative than other children. In other words, less able to work effectively with others. On the other hand, only children are often highly regarded for their autonomy, that is to say, their ability to make their own decisions without being unduly influenced by others. In short, the picture that's emerging is of children who are rather unconventional, that is, not quite normal in social terms. I think it's important to say here that many of these views have been challenged. In fact, more recent research has found that only children are in fact very similar to children with siblings.
Track 3.
The subject of my talk today is the relationship between birth order and personality. By birth order, I mean whether an individual is the firstborn child in the family, a middle child, an only child, and so on. The belief that birth order has a lasting impact on personality is widespread and frequently referred to in popular psychology literature. Alfred Adler, an Austrian psychotherapist, was one of the first to suggest that there was a connection between birth order and personality. He noticed that firstborn children experienced a loss of status with the birth of siblings. According to Adler, this made eldest children more likely to be anxious than other children. However, on the positive side, they also tend to be conscientious and achievement-oriented, perhaps because they want to regain a position of primacy within the family. Since Adler, there have been many attempts to establish links between birth order and a range of personality traits. Some studies have found that last-born children tend to be more extrovert and agreeable. That is, they not only seek out the company of others, but also tend to get along well with other people. Middle children, on the other hand, are more likely to be rebellious, perhaps in an attempt to define themselves as special in relation to their more conscientious elder siblings and agreeable younger siblings. Some studies, for example, have found that middle children are more likely to choose unconventional careers and hobbies. However, whilst these views are widely held among the public, scholars have more recently cast doubt on their validity. Many studies have been found to employ a flawed methodology. For instance, failing to adequately consider variables such as the family's socioeconomic status. Large-scale meta-analyses of studies have proved inconclusive, with no single trait consistently associated with a given position within the family. Nevertheless, most people are intuitively drawn to the idea that birth order has an effect on the sort of people we become.
Track 4. Speaker 1.
We had booked an excursion to the beach, but chose to venture into the hills instead, hoping to see some of the local wildlife.
Speaker 2. Many young people in their 20s seek adventure. That's why they come to places like Thailand and Jamaica. Speaker 3.
We looked all over the town and eventually found a local guide to accompany us to the nearest village.
Speaker 4.
We won't be back until the end of August. Because of the disturbances, we had to reschedule our journey for the following week.
Speaker 5.
I think you'll find your trip down the Amazon quite an adventure. You can expect to encounter some pretty strange insects in the rainforest.
Speaker 6. While backpacking around Thailand, I had to learn to overcome difficulties by myself. I can't count the number of times I got lost. Track 5.
I had the most amazing adventure last year. I spent an afternoon exploring the caves near my village with a group of friends. None of us had ever been caving before, so we went with my friend's brother, who's been doing it for ages. He supplied all the equipment and showed us what to do and how to stay safe. The route down into the earth was really narrow in places. It was quite an intense experience. At one point, I was completely wedged in between two sheets of rock. It was a struggle to stay calm. Eventually, I was able to work my way free and continue the journey. After what seemed like ages, the tunnel opened up into this huge space underground. It was damp and pitch black, full of echoes and other strange noises. I could hear something flapping, but I couldn't see what it was. We had to tread carefully and hang on to each other as the ground was very uneven and there were pools of water all over the place, goodness knows how deep. We slowly worked our way around and back out the way we came in. I suppose I chose to go on this adventure because I needed a challenge. I tend to get nervous in small spaces, so this was an opportunity to try to overcome my fears. Also, this was the last summer we were going to be together before heading off to university, so it was good to do something special, something memorable. I felt really proud of myself at the end of it. It was a valuable experience. I learned that it's really liberating to face your fears. It also confirmed something that I suppose I've always known. Friendship is priceless. There's no way I could have done it on my own.
Track 6. The pinhole camera is a very simple device. It consists of a cylinder with a radius of approximately 4 centimetres and a height of 12 centimetres. There is a small hole, 1 millimetre in diameter, positioned halfway up the wall of the cylinder. A sheet of photographic paper, 18 centimetres in width, curves round the inside of the cylinder, leaving a gap of about 1 centimetre just behind the pinhole. The camera is very simple to use, but it takes a long time to produce a picture. If you fix the camera outside and expose it to the light, After a few minutes, you'll find that an image has appeared on the photographic paper. Track 7. 1.
You may need to adjust the volume of the microphone so that we can hear you at the back of the room.
2.
If we launch the game in January, we're unlikely to maximize sales.
3.
These types of comments reinforce the notion that the unemployed don't want to work.
4. After lengthy negotiations, the contractor was able to secure a good deal. 5.
The organisation has suspended operations until more money becomes available.
Track 8.
OK, as I understand it, we've got to build a device that will allow us to convey a ping-pong ball from one table to another a metre away. Bill, what have we got?
We're only allowed to use 6 sheets of paper, a box of paper clips, some thread, 4 drinking straws, and 2 elastic bands.
I'm not sure where to start. Anybody got any ideas?
Maybe we could use the elastic bands to launch the ball across the gap.
That's not a bad idea, Omar, but I think that would be rather difficult to do. I think we should create a sort of bridge with the sheets of paper. We could suspend it between the tables.
How would that work?
We could cut the paper into strips of about 10 centimetres wide.
I get it, and attach them end to end with paper clips. But how would we secure the bridge to the table?
We could use thread for that. I'm sure we could work something out. But what I'm not sure about is how we can keep the ball from falling off the bridge.
Well, if we fold the sides of the paper so that it forms a cylinder or tube, that would keep the ball from rolling onto the floor. This would also help keep the bridge rigid enough to span the distance between the tables. What do you think, Bill?
I think that's a brilliant idea. If necessary, we could use the drinking straws to further reinforce the structure.
Do you think 10 centimetre strips will be wide enough? What's the diameter of a ping-pong ball?
That's a good question, Omar. I don't know, maybe 2.5 centimetres? OK, what about 15 centimetres?
Track 9. 1.
The owl and the pussycat went to sea in a beautiful pea-green boat. They took some honey and plenty of money wrapped up in a £5 note.
2.
Now, I wonder, Minister, whether you'd like to say something about the government's proposals for banking reform.
Yes, thank you. As I think we all recognise, the need for change in the banking sector is long overdue.
3.
Mikowski plays it into the penalty area. To Dembinski. Dembinski out to Bayor. Bayor beats one man, crosses the ball into the centre.
4.
And now we'll hear Dvorak's Symphony No. 9 in E minor from the New World Opus 95, popularly known as the New World Symphony.
5. But darling, I said nothing of the sort.
You most certainly did. Peter was there. He saw everything.
Surely you're not going to take Peter's word for it. Track 10. Speaker 1.
In my second year, I helped set up the university radio station. It used to broadcast everything from campus news to local bands.
Speaker 2.
As a secondary school pupil, I participated in regional and national debates around the country. It was challenging and very rewarding.
Speaker 3. I've enjoyed concerts ever since I was a child. I used to love watching the conductor. I wanted to be one myself for a time. Speaker 4.
I was editor of the student magazine for a while. People sent in all kinds of articles. I had to choose what to include and then put it all together.
Speaker 5.
I used to attend gallery openings all the time. I love contemporary art. Haven't got much time for it now, unfortunately.
Track 11. 1,
Affairs.
2,
Assemble.
3,
Broadcast.
4,
Classical.
5,
Establish.
6,
Observe.
7,
Orchestra.
8,
Advise.
9.
Resign.
Track 12.
What do you enjoy doing when you're not working or studying?
Well, I've been involved in amateur dramatics for quite a while now. I started out as an actor, taking small parts, but now I'm directing a play. It's a comedy about university life, written by the students.
Tell me more about what that involves.
Basically, I'm responsible for directing what happens on stage. I have to tell the actors what to do. I have to make sure the sets are all right, and the lighting, things like that.
How did you first get started?
I wasn't interested in theatre at all, or acting. I was quite a shy person. But my roommate had a small part in the play, and I used to go along to their rehearsals. One day he was ill, and I stood in for him. I loved it.
What else do you enjoy doing in your spare time?
I quite like listening to music. When I'm free in the evening, I like to go out and see local bands. I'm hoping that someday I'll see a band that becomes really famous.
Track 13.
What do you enjoy doing when you're not working or studying? Tell me more about what that involves. How did you first get started? What else do you enjoy doing in your spare time?
Track 14.
Hurricanes have heavy rains and are therefore more likely to cause floods. Droughts occur when there is a lack of rainfall. Hurricanes and typhoons are both violent storms that develop over water. If the storm develops in the Atlantic or Caribbean, it is referred to as a hurricane. If it develops in the Pacific, it is known as a typhoon. The largest glaciers in the world are found in the polar ice caps of Antarctica and Greenland. Glaciers are also found in mountains. A current is a steady flowing movement of air or water.
Track 15. 1. Sentence A.
In freezing temperatures, water turns into ice and expands.
Sentence B.
Metal, on the other hand, contracts when cold.
2. Sentence A.
It is highly likely that glaciers will continue to melt.
Sentence B.
It is unlikely that they will melt as quickly as some climate experts had predicted.
3. Sentence A. Previous predictions were based on inaccurate data. Sentence B. More accurate information is now available. 4. Sentence A.
Some climate scientists may have overestimated the rate of global warming.
Sentence B.
Others may have underestimated the impact of climate change.
Track 16.
In today's talk, I'm going to give you an overview of the most recent thinking on climate change. Recently, the IGPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has conducted a major review of the evidence for climate change. In its conclusions, it states that the evidence for global warming continues to be overwhelming. However, according to the panel, some of the risk factors identified in earlier reports have been overstated. whereas other impacts of global warming may have been understated. In this talk, I'm going to outline some of the overstated risk factors and explain the current position on each. I'll then mention briefly some of the aspects of global warming that are now considered to be a more serious problem than previously thought. One of the most significant revisions in the new report concerns estimates of rising sea levels. Previous studies had predicted that sea levels would rise by more than 2 metres. The latest evidence suggests that sea levels are likely to rise by no more than 1 metre. This is good news for many coastal areas, as flood defences currently in place are much more likely to cope with a rise of 1 metre. A rise of 2 metres would have required major investment in flood defences. The reason climate scientists have come up with such different predictions of sea level rises has to do with our understanding of what is happening to the major glaciers and ice sheets around the world. Some appear to be contracting faster than predicted, and others appear to be expanding. In 2007, for example, the IGPCC predicted that the Arctic would be ice-free in summer by 2080. The latest predictions bring this date forward by 20 years to 2060. In the Antarctic, on the other hand, the ice sheet appears to be expanding as seawater freezes over. This variability in ice sheet activity accounts for the differences in our predictions of rising sea levels. Another significant revision of our understanding of climate change concerns the Gulf Stream. As many of you probably know, the Gulf Stream is a current of warm seawater that travels from the tropics northeastwards across the Atlantic. It is responsible for keeping temperatures in Europe and North America 5 to 10 degrees warmer than they would be otherwise. An earlier study concluded that the flow rate of the Gulf Stream had decreased by 30% since the 1950s. It warned that the Northern Hemisphere could be heading for another ice age. In other words, a period of prolonged cold. However, a more recent study has indicated that currents of warm water have actually accelerated in the last 20 years. Climate scientists now believe that these differences are due to natural variability, and that the Gulf Stream is unlikely to disappear. This is good news for those who live in Europe and North America. I'd like to move on now and mention some of the consequences of global warming and some of the risk factors which may have been underestimated by previous studies. As far as consequences go, there is new evidence that tropical forests are more susceptible to drought than previously thought, and that the severity of severe weather events, such as hurricanes and typhoons, may have been underestimated in the past. This is particularly bad news for those who live in southern regions. More worrying, there is stronger evidence that thawing permafrost in northern regions is producing very high emissions of methane gas. As I explained in an earlier lecture, methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. This thawing ground has the potential to significantly exacerbate climate change. I therefore have to conclude this talk by saying that, in spite of the good news on rising sea levels, global warming continues to be a serious cause for concern. To ignore it would be most irresponsible.
Track 17. Patient 1.
It's definitely a bacterium and not a virus that's caused your inflammation, so I'm going to prescribe a course of antibiotics.
Patient 2.
I suggest that over the next 6 months you follow a reduced calorie diet and exercise for 30 minutes 3 times a week. Come and see me in 4 weeks' time and we'll see how you're getting on.
Patient 3.
You appear to have developed a sensitivity to pollen. You may need to stay indoors at certain times of the year and take antihistamines to improve your condition.
Patient 4.
I think your headaches may be due to the fact that you haven't been taking in enough fluids. You really need to drink at least a litre of water a day.
Patient 5.
I'm afraid you're going to continue to experience some weakness in your left-hand side. I've referred you to the physiotherapist and prescribed medication to prevent a further occurrence.
Track 18. Speaker 1.
It took us forever to get out of the city. We must have driven for an hour and a half. Nothing but shopping malls and bungalows as far as the eye could see.
Speaker 2.
I don't mind the grime, the crime, or the noise, and the skyscrapers are just amazing. It's a vertical city. You really need to see it to believe it.
Speaker 3.
We stayed in a lovely little cottage, surrounded by meadows. It was gorgeous, so peaceful.
Speaker 4. The high street is thronged during the festival. Street performers, clowns, acrobats, all kinds of people peddling all kinds of crazy things. You'd love it. Speaker 5.
I'd read so much about it when I was at school. I couldn't believe I was actually there, an ancient town, almost perfectly preserved. You weren't allowed to take photographs, but I did anyway, when no one was looking, of course.
Track 19. Speaker 1.
I was never cut out to be an engineer. I just can't do the maths. So yes, on the whole, I think changing over to product design was the right decision for me.
Speaker 2. Whenever we got together to revise, she'd end up moaning about her landlord. She was a good student, but looking back, I don't think the arrangement really worked. Speaker 3.
I can understand why universities may want to increase tuition fees, but if they increase them threefold, only the rich will be able to afford it.
Speaker 4.
I see the pass rates have gone up again this year. That would never have happened in my day, even though we were much better informed than kids nowadays.
Speaker 5. Basically, it allows me to pursue my interest in music and keep my job in the recording studio. It's not so intense either. I've got time to think about what I'm learning, absorb it at my own pace. Track 20. 1.
How are schools today different from schools in your parents' generation?
There is much less discipline and pupils are difficult to control. Standards of behaviour have really declined.
2.
In what ways has the countryside in your country changed during your lifetime?
There are far fewer young people living in the countryside. Many of them have had to abandon rural life and move to the cities to look for work.
3.
What do you think is the most significant change in the way people communicate?
Social networking sites, definitely. Just look at the way they've evolved over the last few years. You could almost spark a revolution with a click of a mouse. 4.
What do you think will be the most significant change in people's lifestyle in the next 10 or 20 years?
I think as energy becomes more expensive, we will have to modify how we live. Consume less, conserve more.
5.
In what ways has the experience of living abroad affected you?
I've had to learn to adjust to different ways of doing things. Shopping, cooking, socialising, all sorts of things.
6.
How, in your view, are patterns of employment in your country likely to change in the next few years?
Many more people are going to work in financial services. That whole sector is developing very rapidly in my country. There are lots of opportunities now. Track 21. 1.
I grew up in a village that looks much as it did 5 centuries ago. Almost nothing has altered.
2.
Job security has diminished over the last few years. It's almost impossible to find long-term work, let alone a job for life.
3.
I think over the next decade, surgical techniques will become increasingly refined. Surgeons will be able to perform operations that we can only dream of now.
4. Within a generation, attitudes towards authority have shifted. Nowadays, people are more likely to challenge authority figures. 5.
Unless we transform the way we live, we're unlikely to survive into the next millennium.
Track 22. 1,
Abandon.
2,
Adjust.
3,
Alter.
4,
Decline.
5,
Develop.
6,
Diminish.
7,
Evolve.
8,
Modify.
9,
Refine.
10,
Shift.
11,
Transform.
12,
Century.
13,
Decade.
14,
Generation.
15.
Millennium.
Track 23.
Do you think people are more adventurous now than in the past? Why, in your view, have attitudes towards risk changed? What sort of adventures do you think people will be having in 10 or 20 years' time?
Track 24.
Do you think people are more adventurous now than in the past?
On the whole, yes, I think they are. When I compare young people today with my parents' generation, I would say that attitudes have shifted. People expect more from life and want to develop personally as well as professionally. People are looking for experiences that will transform them in some way, give them new insights. For example, many people my age want to travel abroad and experience very different lifestyles.
Why, in your view, have attitudes towards risk changed?
I suppose society has evolved. There is a greater emphasis on independence and originality. You can't develop these qualities without taking risks. In my country, previous generations were more likely to conform. People would adjust their behaviour so as not to stand out too much. These days, people want to be a bit different. They want to stand out from the crowd.
What sort of adventures do you think people will be having in 10 or 20 years' time?
I think as tourism extends into every corner of the world, interest in foreign travel as a form of adventure will diminish. People will look for adventure closer to home, maybe by being more creative, doing things that haven't been done before. I have a friend who's lost his job and had to abandon his plans to travel abroad. He's going to see how far he can get by travelling on local buses. I think he's calculated that he can get halfway across the country. It will be quite an adventure. Track 25. 1,
Victor and Vincent are identical twins.
2,
Boys and girls rarely think alike.
3,
We enjoy watching a diverse range of films.
4. Psychiatry and psychology are two distinct disciplines. 5,
The average cost of a house today is equivalent to 6 years' average annual salary.
6,
The minister was sacked for expressing views that were contrary to those of the government.
7,
The majority of female respondents reported spending more on sugary snacks. Conversely, the majority of male respondents said they had spent more on savoury snacks.
8. People who do similar work should receive comparable rates of pay. Track 26. 1.
In order to stay healthy, it is important to eat a varied diet.
2.
The risk of flying in a light aircraft is comparable to that of sailing in a small boat.
3.
He decided to accept my recommendation, which was based on a detailed comparison of the two courses.
4. There is a remarkable resemblance between this song and one that was recorded 30 years ago. 5.
Every student in the class interpreted the essay question differently.
6.
The opinions he expresses in his blog are often in complete contrast to those he expresses on television.
7.
The lecturer contrasted the last three major economic crises.
Track 27.
Many people today complain of job-related stress. Indeed, numerous surveys have shown that most working adults today perceive the workplace to be a more challenging environment than in previous generations. Although on the surface of it, stressful work and challenging work may appear to be identical, it is important to distinguish between the two terms. Job stress occurs when the demands of a job do not match the worker's needs, resources, or skills. A teacher who is required to teach a subject he or she knows nothing about or is not interested in is likely to experience job stress. Prolonged job stress can result in poor physical or emotional health, or what we call burnout. A challenging job is very different in that it encourages the worker to develop skills and resources. Meeting a challenge is rewarding. It is comparable to stretching out to grasp a prize that is nearly within reach. Challenging work can be energizing and contribute to a greater sense of well-being. In fact, an appropriate level of challenge is essential for good physical and emotional health. While we often see some jobs as being inherently stressful or challenging, it is important to remember that these qualities are a function of the match between the worker and the job. Two workers may well have very different experiences of the same job, as no two workers are alike. What is a stressful job for one may well be a challenging job for another.
Track 28. 1.
Surprisingly, the Prime Minister has been elected for a second term.
2.
Interestingly, more young people voted in this election than in the previous one.
3.
Absolutely. I'd love to return to Africa someday.
4. Supposedly, travel broadens the mind. 5.
Undoubtedly, cooking with natural ingredients is better for your health.
6.
Inevitably, the cost of fuel will rise.
7.
Presumably, fewer people will travel by car if petrol becomes too expensive.
Track 29. 1.
Absolutely.
2.
Necessarily.
3.
Particularly.
4.
Presumably.
5.
Supposedly.
6.
Surprisingly.
Track 30. Tell me about the house or flat you live in. How do you feel about living there? Is the decoration or appearance of the place you live important to you? When choosing things for your flat, Is the appearance of an object more important to you than how well it works? Track 31.
Hello, my name is Susan Davy. Can you tell me your full name, please? Thanks. Can I please see your identification? Thanks, that's great. I'm going to ask you some questions about yourself now. Tell me about your favourite film or television programme. How do you think television has changed since you were a child? Are there any types of programmes that you don't like to watch? I'd like to ask you a few questions about transport. How do you normally travel to your work or place of study? How do people in your country normally travel? How easy is it to get around in your country? We're now going to talk about places of interest in your country. What do you think is the most interesting building or monument in your country? Do you prefer historic building styles to modern architecture? To what extent do people in your country value traditional architecture?
Track 32. 1.
As I was getting into the car, I saw the crack in the windscreen. I have no idea how it happened, but it's going to be expensive to repair.
2.
My grandmother's feeling poorly and lost her appetite. I'm afraid she's not as strong as she used to be, but I don't know what I can do to help.
3.
I've just been told that I've got to show my identification card to get a new key for my locker. But I think I left my ID in the locker before I lost my key. What a ridiculous situation.
4.
I think you'd better come home straight away. That big tree in the garden has come down onto the power line in front of the house. It looks really dangerous.
5. I've just been invited to go to Alaska with my brother and his wife. It's the trip of a lifetime. But I should really save the money to pay for my course. I just can't decide what to do. Track 33. 1.
Don't worry, the damage to your car can be easily repaired.
2. I'm sure you'd like to do more to alleviate her suffering. 3.
If you speak to the manager, she may be able to resolve your predicament.
4.
I'll be right over. That's not a crisis you should tackle on your own.
5.
You're never going to resolve that dilemma until you decide what you really want.
Track 34.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kerry Wilson, one of the student welfare team, and I'm going to talk to you about how to deal with some of the difficulties that may arise while you're studying with us. Of course, we hope that you won't experience any problems during your studies, but it's good to know what help is available should anything go wrong. I know some of you have had a problem opening a bank account and that you're anxious about paying your course fees. If you're in this predicament, don't worry. To open an account, you need to present evidence that you are enrolled on a full-time course. Just go to the Language Centre office and ask for a letter of enrolment. As long as you have registered for the course, you can get a letter. You don't need to have paid your fees. For those of you who are living in private accommodation, we would advise you to speak to one of the student welfare team before signing a lease. Sometimes disputes can arise, for example in relation to damage to property. If you have a disagreement with your landlord, one of the welfare team can intervene if necessary. Finally, the Student Welfare Office can be phoned at any time during the day or night in case of an emergency. If your room is burgled, for example, do not hesitate to phone the emergency number in your welfare handbook. This type of crisis is very rare, but please be assured that help is available should you require it.
Track 35. 1.
Government cuts to public spending triggered a second economic downturn.
2.
Many environmentalists believe that the offshore oil industry has resulted in significant damage to marine life.
3.
Interestingly, the Second World War contributed to the expansion of female employment, in particular, the increase in numbers of women doing jobs typically reserved for men.
4. A number of commentators have said that the recent public disorder stems from the high rates of youth unemployment. 5.
Some people even believe that your genes determine whether or not you succeed in life.
6.
The return of wolves to southern regions of Europe has provoked fear and anger among many farmers.
7.
There is evidence that some skin conditions can result from excessive cleanliness.
Track 36. Speaker 1.
My uncle turns 65 next year, at which point he'll presumably retire.
Speaker 2.
Do I think nurses should be better paid? Absolutely.
Speaker 3.
My employers have provisionally agreed to give me time off to complete my studies.
Speaker 4. Supposedly, Jim wrote the essay himself, but it looks to me like he had a bit of help. Speaker 5.
Ideally, I'd like to buy a flat of my own, but unfortunately, it looks like I'll have to rent for a few more years.
Speaker 6.
Inevitably, the new supermarket is going to bring more cars into the area.
Speaker 7.
I'd like to stay in Japan indefinitely, but I'm not sure that's going to be possible.
Track 37.
I guess one of the most difficult dilemmas I've faced concerns a colleague, Lydia, who also happens to be a friend. I'd been given the task of organising a series of social events for a group of school children visiting from Germany, and I thought it would be a great idea to work with Lydia, so I persuaded my boss to assign her to me as an assistant. I have to say, it was a mistake from the start. Lydia was so disorganised, kept forgetting what she was to do, lost track of what she'd paid for, and so on. I suppose, looking back, she just didn't have the experience or the skills for the job. Don't get me wrong, she was a great laugh and we're still friends, but I had to work overtime to sort everything out. Looking back, I can see that I didn't really address the problem directly. I just covered up for her mistakes and made sure the programme ran smoothly. I didn't want my boss to intervene. I suppose I felt partly to blame because I hadn't really thought carefully about whether she was really suitable for the job. Anyway, that experience has taught me that it's safer to keep friendship and work matters separate.
Track 38. 1.
I don't really subscribe to the notion that men and women have fundamentally different styles of communication. Where's the evidence?
2.
You really have to question the credibility of some of the conspiracy theories surrounding the assassination.
3.
I didn't think we should invest in developing a new widget, but he put forward a valid argument and I'm now prepared to go along with it.
4. The accusation that the chief executive knew about the illegal activities of his employees is based on pure conjecture. 5.
The case for independence is now so compelling, I can't see an alternative course of action.
6.
The minister's stance of deregulation is bound to be biased. He's got a considerable financial interest in the industry.